Let's be honest, few humans enjoy meetings, and many feel trapped in meetings. As leaders, we don't want to burden those we lead, but meetings can seem to do that more often than not. We wanted to address the pain of meetings through the Meetings with Saints library. Here we have 15 plus presentations dedicated to improving the meetings we run. We have experts in the field addressing topics like getting people involved in meetings, staying on task, dealing with conflict in meetings, and a ton more. We'd love you to explore the full Meetings with Saints library over 14 days at no cost to you. You can do this by visiting leadingsaints.org/14. That's leadingsaints.org/14. We'll also give you access to all of our virtual libraries that educate about other leadership topics. It's really good stuff. So visit leadingsaints.org/14 or click the link in the show notes. Today we're recording one of the few episodes that in my own home office here with Walter Franco. How are you, Walter?
Doing great, Kurt. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now you live in Herriman now.
Now, yes.
And that's southeast side or southwest of part of Salt Lake County.
Right.
And you happen to be coming to Tooele County, where I live, for some business meetings. And so we thought, hey, while you're here, let's record, right?
Yep.
And now, maybe just give us background. Where are you originally from, Utah, or what's your background?
Yeah, so I'm originally from San Diego. Was born in San Diego, California, and lived there and in Tijuana, Mexico for the first 8 years of my life. Then my mom got married, and then we moved to Nevada with my at that time stepdad. Lived there for 3 years in Reno, and then eventually moved over to Utah right before high school. I think in 8th grade. And lived first in Magna, then eventually moved over to Holiday, and went to high school at Olympus before going on my mission. So nice. For the last 20 or so years, 19 out of the last 22 years or so that I've been in Utah, aside from the mission and 2 years and then a year in grad school back in San Diego.
Nice. And you were a bishop in a Spanish-speaking unit in Midvale, Utah, which is sort of the middle of Salt Lake County, right?
That's right.
What do you remember from that story of being called as bishop? Because for people who can't see, you're not this aged 69-year-old who knows all about life. You're a young buck, right?
Yeah, I just turned 36 a few weeks ago, so I'm starting to feel a lot old. And I broke my back in a skiing accident in high school, so I actually have a really weak back, relatively speaking. Wow. So I have back problems consistently, so I do feel old physically. So, but I was called as a bishop in actually first as a branch president in August of 2017. We were a branch back then, but and my stake president at the time told me that eventually we would become a ward, and that would be the first bishop of the ward. And come to find out, a month later that happened, and so we became a ward a month later, and I officially became a bishop. So, and it just recently was released. As I mentioned, we just moved to Herriman, and so I had served for essentially 4 years and 9 months.
Wow! So when you became a ward, I assume they set you apart again, and ordained you as a bishop type of thing?
So I was already a high priest before, because I had been called earlier that year to be serving the high council, stake high council. And just basically as soon as they got permission from the first presidency, it just was set apart as a bishop now.
So any general advice you'd have for others, maybe who go from being a branch to a ward? Like, was there anything that surprised you in that transition?
I've been in other branches before, but in this case for me, I wouldn't say there was much of a transition, because in many ways we were already operating as a ward autonomously. Typically in other Spanish branches that I've been, you're getting a lot of support with leadership from stake or from other wards. And so in this case, we were we already felt like a ward. So it really wasn't, it was just more of a formality. It wasn't really that much of a change.
Nice. And you served for almost 5 years.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And then you moved, and so they released you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so this was a Spanish speaking unit in Salt Lake County area. Mm-hmm. This is a topic close to my heart because I was a Spanish speaking missionary in Sacramento, California. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we were in, very, in a English speaking stake, but mm-hmm. in a Spanish speaking unit. So just explain the dynamics of your ward, what that was like, anything worth mentioning.
Yeah. So I guess to give more context first is, so up until my mission, I had never attended a Spanish speaking unit in my life. So my mom is from Mexico, so I grew up speaking Spanish. But growing up in San Diego, my mom was baptized. So I was baptized Catholic. My mom was baptized in the church when I was 5. And then I eventually was baptized at 8. So in many ways, I still feel like I grew up in the church because my only real memories are being a member of the church. But for growing up into high school, I'd only been to English speaking units. Right. And so I didn't really have a concept or understanding of Spanish speaking units. It wasn't until my mission. First, several of the areas, there wasn't a large enough population base or sufficient members to have a ward or a branch. And so we would have small groups, kind of like we mentioned before this podcast, that we would have maybe 5 or 10 investigators or members that spoke Spanish. And so I would interpret in the back of the sacrament hall, and then we'd have our own gospel principles class in Spanish. And that was about it. And so it wasn't until I was actually in Jacksonville, Florida, the city where I served my mission, where I actually attended a branch for the first time, really liked the culture and the feel. And so when I came back and got married to my wife, she had always gone to a Spanish speaking unit her whole life. And so we decided together to start attending. So this was about 14 years ago. And ever since, that's all we've attended. And so when I compare, and this rather than give you, I guess, my personal perspective, this is the perspective that a lot of the stake has given us, that they really like the familial feel, that it feels like family in Spanish, where we always have activities, a lot of fun activities. We're very party happy.
Always people. Good food.
Yeah. Always great food. Yeah, exactly. And very diverse too. I think sometimes people that don't attend Spanish wards, don't understand kind of that there are a lot of cultural intricacies in a Spanish unit because not everyone's from one country. So you have, specifically in my ward, you had probably the largest base was either Mexican or Peruvian descendancy. Mm-hmm. And then you have a lot of Argentinians, Venezuelans, Colombians. So obviously we're united by our language, and there's certain similarities with certain foods and certain, values, but the accents are different, the dialects, a lot of interests are sometimes different, than the food can be different. And so
only the Mexican food is spicy. Right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So it's very unique, but we do unite, and obviously in our faith and our testimonies. And that's why we're able to have fun and have these activities and parties and everything. So it's different too, in the sense that, when you're teaching both to adults and the youth, you can kind of be more animated when you teach. And I'm not saying this is a critique of English speaking students where I went, but I feel when I was, growing up, going to English speaking units, you tend to be, and this is me also speaking, you tend to teach more, not close to the vest, but you tend to just teach more, formal, buttoned up with your approach, right?
Would you say like reverence is sort of prioritized?
I think so.
Like as far as like how I present myself when I talk about the gospel, I'm very reverent. I'm not,
there's a certain way into right. Yeah. There's more of a certain cadence, right? But and you might be able to remember from your mission when you speak in Spanish, you use your hands a lot more. You're more animated, and so I have a very unique style in Spanish units where I try to make people laugh a lot, and we'll sit down in the middle of class. I'm teaching, I'll sit down next to someone and I'll ask them questions, and then I'll get up again. Nice. And then, so it just creates kind of a different environment. Right. But, so I think, it's definitely, if you have the opportunity, especially we get a lot of return missionaries that, went on Spanish speaking missions that come to our ward to try it out, and they ended up, many stay and love
like
it because
gringos?
like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Like gringos. Yeah. Because they said, I absolutely love serving in a Spanish ward in my whether it was in another country or here in the States. And they have this, they developed this love for the Latino people, and it really can be contagious. And that's why, the stake often comes to us, say, hey, what type of activities can we have that kind of have that same feel that you guys do? And, and sometimes it's achievable, but I think a lot of it has to do with kind of the culture, cultural differences. So
that's maybe a place to leverage is to, harness that energy that maybe comes from the Spanish speaking area that are maybe more accustomed to parties. I don't know. I feel like, I know that, Americans don't like parties, but I don't know. It's just, there's a different energy, different games, right? Good or bad. It is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nice. I'm curious, you talk about the diversity of different countries and backgrounds, who obviously all speak Spanish. I remember that stimulated some drama at times where you sort of have these cliques of I remember the Peruvians were sort of in their group and the Mexicans in their group and whatnot. I mean, was that a real dynamic that you had to work through? It
absolutely is. It's an unfortunate thing, but you usually tend to see a lot more familiarity with, certain groups. Peruvians are more, I don't want to say helpful, but they kind of just gather more around their own, and same with Mexicans and everything. Yeah. I would like to say that in my time as a bishop, you didn't see that as much. And I'm not necessarily doing that to give me credit, but I think there was definitely a concerted effort from us as leaders to make sure that everyone felt included, and that there were, I don't want to say there were no cliques period, but just to really minimize that and try to engage everyone the same way. And it's something that we truly embrace too. I would often bring up, jokingly to the ward, like this, we're experiencing a Peruvian invasion. And I would joke that if I were more obedient in the premortal life, I would have been born Peruvian and things like that. And people like that. And so, just to try to make light of it. But, in other words, definitely I had sensed that a lot.
And was there anything in Utah, anything intentional that you did, or routines, or other than maybe just mentioning it jokingly here and there?
Yeah, I think just kind of acknowledging it and then just kind of playing it off, I think helped a lot. But like I said, I think for the most part, especially as I was wrapping up these last few years in the mission, and as a bishop, it wasn't something that was really noticeable, but it is something noticeable that you can kind of tell at the beginning, and you kind of try to work with leadership, and it helps having a very diverse leadership as well. So in my bishopric, my counselors actually had a lot of turnover, had to rotate a lot, but my last two counselors, one was from Spain and the other one was from Peru. Before that, one was Mexican, another one was American. Another one was Guatemalan. And so having that diversity and having everyone see that we're working together despite our cultural differences, I think went a long way.
Yeah. Try not to have the full ward council from Mexico. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Well, as we do in these How I Lead interviews, I had you send me a few principles that we could talk through. Maybe we've touched on some of these already, but the first one being see them as the Lord sees them. And this probably plays off of what you were just saying. Anything else to add there? Yeah, no,
I think as a leader in working with leadership, but also working with the members, one thing that I think I was able to achieve from the very beginning is, before I was a bishop, obviously, members, kind of know sometimes some of the background with some issues or challenges that they have, or just as a human being, right? I don't like how he combs or she combs her hair. I don't like the shoes, or I don't like that they like BYU as I'm a University of Utah alum.
Oh boy. So I had no idea. I didn't screen you well enough.
So little things like that. I mean, obviously that's a trivial thing, but just an example, like there's differences across the board. Right. And so one thing that I learned quickly as a bishop is that whatever prejudice or whatever preconceived notion you have about a certain person, you have to check that out at the door, especially as a bishop. And because they're going to be coming to you with their most pressing, their most intimate issues or challenges or questions. And so you have to be a neutral, loving voice and ear more than anything. And more than that, going back to that point with how the Lord sees them. So obviously all of us have imperfections, and really something that I try to see, the members of my ward was, how does the Lord look at them? Well, if I look at them as a human being, I might see their defects, their faults, the things that they do wrong, if they don't wake up on time, or if they don't read their scriptures every single day, or if they don't pay an honest tithe. And if I if I judge them for that, how does the Lord see them? Does the Lord really look at them and scoff at them, or kind of roll their eyes? He would never do that, right? The Lord sees them lovingly. And more than that, I need to worry about how the Lord sees me, right? If I'm seeing someone very badly, how is that person seeing me, or how are others seeing me, right? And I want them to see me the same way that the Lord sees me. The Lord sees the potential in all of us, regardless of our defects. And so I really had to change my perspective and look at them, and rather than look at their weaknesses, look at their potential and really build off of that. Once I understood, this person is a child of God just like I am, and the Lord loves them, and the Lord sees so much potential in their what they can achieve both temporally and spiritually on this earth. I need to have that same vision, and doing that really helped me have really great personal relationships with the members of the ward, where I understood them, and they felt too that I was more of their advocate, that I wasn't there to make them feel bad, but I was there to lift them up and to listen to them and to encourage them, sometimes cheerlead. And by having that relationship, then when it was necessary, if there had to be a correction, or if we had to have a tough discussion, or things that would be maybe uncomfortable, I could do that with more confidence, because they knew it was coming from someone that truly cared about them, and that I wasn't just looking at their faults, but I was looking at, hey, these are some challenges. How can I help you to build off of that? How can I help you improve? How can I, more than anything, how can I help you build your relationship and fortify your relationship with Jesus Christ?
Yeah. And any story or experience come to mind as far as how you go about that? Like maybe somebody is walking in your office for a confession, or just having a hard time, because it's easy to sort of default to that, well, you know how bad this is or whatnot. How did you approach that as more like the cheerleader or the encourager? Yeah.
So, I mean, I especially in dealing with, working with youth, preparing for missions, one of the things that I always said was, as they're preparing their papers, I always say, as soon as you submit this paper, as soon as you commit, be prepared for a hailstorm of problems from or temptations from Satan, and he knows your weaknesses. So this is a testament to you of the commitment that you're making the right decision, because all these temptations will come in. And I've essentially not prophesied or predicted, but said, these are the types of challenges that will come to you as a result of this commitment that you've made. And in many cases, if they didn't really heed to that counsel, they would come back to me and say, hey, I'm struggling with this or that. And then we would talk through it, rather than saying, hey, I told you so. I'd say hey, okay, we discussed about these possibilities happening. So what can I do to help you now get back on that road, to get you back on the right path. Right. And so it was always more about, rather than me saying, this is what you need to do, it was, talk to me about what's happening. How do you feel? Do you feel this could have been different? And then I turn it around on them and say, how can I support you in this process and helping? I think, and that usually led to really great discussions where sometimes they answer their own questions and they say, well, I need to do this better. I need to change this. And I said, I think that's a great idea, and really put the ownership of repentance or change in their hands, rather than saying, giving them a prescription like I'm a doctor. I'm saying, what do you feel the Lord is telling you? And then once they've gone through that process, is talk to them and say, do you feel, not only do you feel like the Lord has forgiven you, but have you forgiven yourself as well? Mm-hmm. We've had those, and having those discussions and letting them dictate how they are on the road to recovery. And I think giving them that sense of empowerment, really helped strengthen those relationships as well. Yeah. I love that, sense of empowerment. And I love a good reframe, because you're framing it like, of course this is happening. Of course it's been a tough week for you, because look at these commitments you've made right now. Let's look at it for what it is. And I'm your partner in this and in this battle with the adversary. And so let's figure out what the next step is, rather than, I'm so disappointed. Like, here you are preparing for a mission. Right. That's not a helpful frame. Right? And that's something that would happen sometimes too, is not just those preparing for a mission, but sometimes people would come to me and say, I didn't want to tell you because I'm embarrassed. I didn't want to disappoint you. And I would have to come back and say, hey, listen, I'm always here to support you. I'm here to help you strengthen your relationship with Christ, and to help them to properly apply the atonement. And so I really try to eliminate that sense for, I'm their bishop, so I'm kind of their judge, and obviously to a degree, yes, we are judges in Israel, but at the end of the day, I'm I always would try to really drive home the point that I'm simply an instrument to help them strengthen the relationship and to apply the atonement. And so I would really play off of that and say, you're not here. Don't do this for me. Do this for the Lord. How are you feeling with the Lord? And always frame it on their relationship with the Lord and not their relationship with me.
Yeah. Turning them back to the Lord. Cause that's, it's really, he's the one in charge here.
Exactly.
And he's helping the process. Anything else as far as see them as the Lord sees them? No.
And I think what I would try to do too, also with, with other leaders as well, the Elders Quorum President Relief Society, being in a ward, in our Spanish unit, I think one of the challenges that we had is, I think with most English speaking wards, you typically have ward rosters in the hundreds and hundreds, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have obviously a certain percentage that are inactive, but you typically have a larger pool to draw from for strong leadership. With Spanish wards, at least the one that I was recently in, we only had, maybe 240 members on the roll. And so about 50% were active. And so you don't have as wider pool of leadership. And a lot of those people that are active are usually first generation members, recent converts. And so they don't have the established leadership skills that were developed from years of generations of, or at least understanding the culture of the church, and not a negative culture, but just the culture of leadership and understanding the sacrifices and the commitments. Right. And so one of the things that I really try to work with leaders that I worked with in ward council, et cetera, is that in working with teachers and working with other counselors, we're going to fail. We're going to mess up. There's a huge learning curve for a lot of people. Sometimes with recent converts, we throw them into really demanding callings because we need the help there, and to really have the patience with them and say, hey, listen, they're trying their best. All of us are trying our best. None of us are being paid. We're committed to the Lord. And so if they truly magnify their calling, regardless of what that capacity is, someone's capacity might be smaller than another, but as long as they maximize it, then that's enough to the Lord. And that should be enough for us as well. And just really embrace what they can give and applaud them for it and build them up. And by the next year, that capacity will increase and vice and et cetera. Right. And so, I think that was something that we really try to emphasize as leadership in the ward, to really have patience and really see them all as the Lord sees them, their infinite potential, and understand that it's a process. It's not an event. Mm-hmm. Talking about conversion and also just developing our leadership skills. Yeah. And
was there a certain context in which you did emphasize that? Was it in ward council and one-to-one meetings, or you're just always saying it?
Mostly one-to-one meetings, because sometimes if someone was struggling with fulfilling callings or miscommunication, et cetera, I would often speak with the Elders Quorum President or Relief Society or Sunday School President. They would come to me and say, hey, we're struggling with this member. And so oftentimes we'd say, okay, have you met with them yet? Have you talked about, rather than saying, hey, you're not doing this and this, asking them, how do you think things are going in your calling? Are there any challenges? Are there any successes? And then again, kind of reframing it back to them, letting them tell you if there's an issue. And if they don't identify it, then working with them, saying, hey, we feel that we can probably improve on this. And so it's almost like it's kind of like a job review, or almost in a way. I hate to term it that, but
like an opportunity for feedback.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And make it more than, hey, this is what you're doing wrong. This is what you need to change. But having a back and forth conversation and to make sure that we're on the same page, because oftentimes our expectations are different than theirs or their understanding. Right. And so usually when you work it out that way, you're able to clear the air and build common ground off of that. And in many cases, they'll recognize, oh, I didn't know you expected that from me, or yes, you're right. I realized that I need to do a better job. And they're more committed, as opposed to saying, hey, you didn't show up for this class. We really need you to commit. Framing it different, like, hey, we missed you in class today. Is there anything that I can help you with, and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so easy sometimes in these volunteer, religious experiences that you can sort of just not talk about it and just say, well, Exactly. It is what it is. I don't want to get on his case about whatever, but I think people in the end, they really appreciate feedback that's done in a very respectful way. And then now they walk out of that office, maybe they're kind of frustrated, but if it's met with love, right. They're like, I probably could do better. And this is cool because I want to do a good job in this calling. Right. And that's great.
And I think the important thing too is recognizing that ultimately, whether you're in Sunday school or whatever calling you have, you're not doing it for the bishop. You're not doing it for the Sunday school president. You're not doing it for the elders quorum president. I'm not doing my job as a bishop for this to make the stake president happy. Ultimately, it's because of the commitment I personally made with the Lord. So all of this, all that I'm doing is for the Lord. And if we have that frame of reference or perspective in any of our callings, I think it helps us understand what this is really about, that it's serving the Lord through his servants and blessing others. And so if we recognize that we're not doing it to be in line with what the bishop wants or to not disappoint him, but rather saying, I'm doing this because I made commitments, covenants when I got baptized, I made covenants when I went to the temple to serve and to commit. That I think helps a lot, and it gives you maybe the proper motivation to really try to magnify your calling. Yeah.
The next principle is listen first and listen a lot before you speak. I mean, there's probably few skills that leaders could work on than listening. So teach us.
I think, and this is more probably, well, no, I think this applied a lot to my conversations on one-on-ones with leaders, but mostly obviously in counseling and working with the members when they would come to me is, I would always try to fully hear them out first. And sometimes, and there are many times where I actually wouldn't speak or give them recommendations or any counsel. I would let them first just speak about their challenges or questions or issues. And then I would ask more questions. Have you thought about this, or what are your thoughts about that, to really fully understand from their perspective? Because sometimes when someone makes a decision or has a certain thought or certain action, as a human being, you'll think, well, that was dumb, or why did you do that? Like, I totally wouldn't have done that. But but I try to really understand their context. If they're a recent convert, and many times, if it's a 35-year-old that gets baptized, they had a completely different lifestyle in life before, right? And so I need to fully understand that context, whatever their challenges are now, because they most likely didn't have the same type of lifestyle or life that I did. And if I better understand where they're coming from and put myself in their shoes, then I feel like I'm better able to apply the Spirit and be able to provide more relevant, context. And oftentimes what would happen is I maybe wouldn't have any immediate thoughts for them in that meeting, but then the next day or the day after I would listen to a conference talk, and then it would click and like, oh, that's exactly what they needed. And then I would send it to them via text message or whatever and say, hey, thanks again for talking the other night. And I listened to this conference talk, and I think this is actually really applied. And many times it would be, oh, wow, this is actually, this is perfect. And so I really tried to just be as good a listener as I can, to listen to them. And many times that's sometimes all they wanted was just to vent and talk. And as I mentioned before, working sometimes with missionaries, is by asking them questions and kind of just listening to them. Sometimes they end up answering their own questions or concerns or their own plan of action to help them get out of a certain challenge or temptation or sin or whatever. And so there were some times where I would have to say, well, this is what should happen, but I think that's after developing those relationships. Right. And so, especially when I'm meeting a member for the first time, or don't have an established relationship with them, I really try to listen as much as possible first and really gain their confidence that way, because I think it probably comes off very authoritatively if they come in and I immediately start saying, hey, read this verse and this verse and, come back to me in a week. And so it's more of just listening to their concerns. And I think doing that has really, as I mentioned before, has really given me a good chance to build great relationships, because they felt that they had an ear to listen to. And sometimes I was the only person they could speak to, because either their spouse wouldn't understand or if it's a youth, they couldn't discuss it with their parents yet, or they didn't know how to discuss it. And so by listening to them and just them knowing they can get it off their chest, I think probably felt like a relief to a degree. Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed with a lot of people maybe think they have a problem and then they want it solved, but really what they want is they want somebody to hear it and witness it, right? Even if you don't have the answer, right? Yeah. It's like, well, I don't know what to do, and the bishop doesn't really seem to do, but he sat with me in that, and he didn't push me towards a specific scripture immediately or a 3-point plan or whatnot. And it seems like, as we talk about this on paper, like it seems easy, but you really have to push through that knee-jerk reaction of being like, oh, well, I got the perfect scripture, or here's three conference talks, and just saying like, no, I'm actually going to ask another question, right?
Right.
Or I'm going to say, what do you think? Or what have you thought of? And you may find out they've already thought about that concept that you were about to fire hose them with, right?
Right.
And just creating that space and let it unfold naturally rather than, we got 15 minutes here. What do you got? Like, let's solve this and get you on your way. Cause I got another appointment coming in. Right.
Right. And I think along those lines too is sometimes there wouldn't be a solution or an answer right away. And we would talk about like, specifically with the gospel and say, hey, listen, the gospel or the conversion to the gospel isn't an event. It's really a process. Like hopefully the idea is or the plan is that we live several decades long. And so there's going to be highs and lows. It's going to be a roller coaster. So there's not supposed to be one moment where you figure it out. And so working with members is, work through these challenges or issues over time. It's going to be a process, and ask those questions. But at the same time, what really matters is going back to the basics of the gospel, which is faith, repentance, baptism, gifts of the Holy Ghost, receiving the gifts of the Holy Ghost, and enduring to the end. If we really focus on those basics and really try our best to strengthen that core, then ultimately the rest kind of falls into place. We have more peace, especially if we have doctrinal questions that maybe we won't get the answer in this lifetime. And when I've shared that, I say like, I've thought about this too, or that's a great question. And to be honest, I don't know if you're going to get an answer for that in this lifetime. However, where are you with these core principles? Do you feel like you're doing your best there? And if you are, then I promise you that the Lord will give you ease of mind with these other questions or challenges, because you're focusing on what really matters. Some of these questions ultimately may not matter in the eternal perspective. But this is what we're going to be judged on, not on those questions. We're going to be judged on our faithfulness. Are we applying the atonement? Are we enduring to the end?
Yeah. I love that. And just refocuses them so that they can start to breathe again, in the context of the gospel. Anything else in regards to listening that you haven't touched on yet?
No, I think that's it.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. Next principle is my role is to lead by serving. How did you do that?
Yeah. So I think, I always try to, so having served in other leadership callings as well, I remember specifically on my mission. So I met my wife, she was a missionary as well in Jacksonville, Florida. And I remember I was giving a talk or a presentation to the missionaries in Zone Conference. And I don't remember what I said or what it was about, but I remember my wife was in one of those Zone conferences and she specifically said how she was like really just kind of turned off by my approach, where I said, you guys need to do this and that.
That's right? What she knew. That's the man. That's what
she's like, I'm going to change that guy. So that kind of always stuck with me. So this was, like I said, 15, 16 years ago, is rather than saying you, I've been very careful too when I speak in sacrament or I teach in class as a bishop, where I never say you, I say we. I say we as members of the church, we as members of this ward, we as human beings need to do this and that. So I've always changed that because of that conversation, because I don't want to come off. And I've told this to all the time in my interviews or meeting with members. I said, please know, although I'm the bishop, that does not mean that I'm better than you. It does not mean that I'm more spiritual than you. It does not mean that the Lord loves me more. Like, I am simply, this is a temporary calling. I'm an instrument for the Lord for a specific period of time. Eventually I'll be released and that won't matter anymore, right? Someone else will be a bishop. I'm only here for this time to be a bishop. And my principal role is to serve and to help you strengthen your relationship with Christ, right? And so that's what I would say verbally, but talking about leading or serving by, or leading by serving, however I said it, lead by serving, right? By serving, is to, I've always said as a bishop, my other role is to be the first one to serve. Call of action, right? I'm the first one to get my hands dirty. I'm the first one. If someone needs help for whatever reason, I'm the first one to extend my hand. And it's not for me to delegate. I mean, there's elements of that I need to delegate for certain tasks, but I need to be the first one to always respond. Almost a spiritual first responder, if you will. And I would verbally say it, but I would also physically do it by with hospital visits, obviously, which was frequent, but also with activities, being the first one to lift up clean chairs and to help, with cleaning assignments and to take the lead on certain initiatives or service opportunities. And that way, by me doing that, when I would come to members or leaders and ward council and say, hey, we've received this assignment. I've already taken this date. And by showing first, rather than saying, hey, I need someone to take care of this. And then I don't want to give that perception that I'm laying back and letting someone else take care of it. Right. And so, by doing that and even helping when I'm not required to be there with certain activities for Relief Society and stuff like that, I tried to give off the perception or sense that I'm always there to serve and to help. Mm-hmm. And that ultimately that's what a leader is serving, rather than, sitting on a soapbox and telling people to repent and doing this and that. Like I really tried to avoid that and really shied away from being a center of attention, saying, oh, he's the bishop with the high authority. And ultimately too is, working with the Relief Society or the Elders Quorum president, they would, or their young women's president or whoever, they sometimes would kind of come to me and say like, okay, you have the final word on this thing. And I would say, no, like, why do you feel that we should do this activity or this or that? Like, and I would turn around and what are your thoughts? And then say, okay, how can I help you achieve that? And really, again, trying to empower them where they don't feel like I have to give the final say for everything. There's certain instances, obviously, where, I would have to say, well, I really think we should go this direction, but that was really few and far between. In many cases, it was just the leaders being autonomous. And that's, I feel, because I tried to, serve them and say, how can I help you? And really trusting their impression, specifically with the sisters, with Relief Society and young women, where I would tell them as they select counselors or certain things that they want to do or minister. I would say, I trust the impressions that you receive in the relationship with the Lord. I sustain you and I support you. Trust in the Lord, not saying trust in me, trust in my counsel. I say, I trust in the Lord. Come back to me with what you're feeling and let me know how I can support you. And, like I said, in my time, I don't think we've ever had any issues where, I said something and people were against it, or there were like disagreements or fights, maybe more with one of my counselors, but that's because we had a great relationship and we understood exactly what we were doing as servants of the Lord. And so, but we sustained each other and worked each other great. But, I think just showing by your actions and your word is the best way to lead, to serve by leading or lead by serving. Yeah.
I think that if you set the standard of just being proactive, I think that sort of sets a tone of a culture, right. And to encourage your ward council, we're just going to be proactive people. Right.
Right.
And if we're proactive, then we can ask people to be proactive. Right. And it's all works out.
Right.
That's awesome. So before we wrap up, I want to just get your general thoughts as far as leading a Spanish unit in an English speaking stake. And this could be, there's Polynesian wards out there. There's, there's a few Chinese wards out there, I know, in Salt Lake and whatnot. And so, and I get, and speaking to sort of that group who maybe has misconceptions about the Spanish ward and the stake, and I think most people by far, there's nothing but best intentions in it. Right. And of course you can probably think of a handful of experiences of like some lady or man in the stake said this thing and it was like so offensive, but obviously that's not the norm. Right.
Right.
So just speaking to like those members who have a language unit in their stake, like any misconceptions that come to mind readily or any advice you have? Yeah,
no, I think it's always been a challenge anywhere, but I think the important thing is to try to really find common ground with members of non-English speaking units. The common ground is our faith and testimony in the church and Christ, right? And so that should be enough to build and strengthen those relationships. I think, unfortunately, sometimes if you're an English speaking ward, some people might have the perception, oh, they're foreigners, they're different. They have different lifestyles. They have different beliefs. They have different values. But the reality is all of us, many of us in the Spanish units specifically, we also have families. We also have jobs. We also struggle. We also have anxiety, depression. We also have to pay rent or mortgage. We also have to pay car insurance. We have the same challenges that any English speaking unit does, right? And the only difference is sometimes we're first or second generation immigrants that are coming from a different lifestyle. Sometimes we're first generation converts where we didn't have the foundation of the gospel or pioneer ancestry, right? We're literally
You are the pioneers.
We are the pioneers, right? Yeah. And so just like the pioneers back in the 1800s, they had different lifestyle, different challenges, but they were able to bind together. And so, I think finding that common ground first, and understanding that we're more similar than different. I think, as I had mentioned before I became bishop, I was called to be in the High Council and was assigned to oversee one of the English speaking wards. And so I remember first the reaction from the branch was actually very excitement, because they said, we're finally going to have a Spanish speaking representative at the stake level. So it was kind of like there was a lot of pride in that, and I didn't understand why, but then just being in I think it helped to change perceptions that sometimes exist between English speaking wards and non-English speaking wards, that, and sometimes unfortunately some veiled or discrimination, unfortunate. But I think when I was in the stake, when I was a high councilman, it was a great experience overseeing this ward. And right there too, I immediately tried to immerse myself in the ward and help and serve, and would go on elders quorum visits and work with the bishop and see how I support him, go to sacrament meeting often. And I think that really helped them see, this is, a Spanish speaking member. He's more like us. He works, he has a family, and so that I think helped a lot. And it helped really create a great relationship where even after, they would still remember me as we would see some of their stake events, and it helped build a better relationship with that Spanish unit. And so, I remember too, this was in a different branch, probably 10 years ago, there was a member from another ward in the stake who kind of mumbled himself, like, why don't they learn to speak English? They're here in the United States, which is, I'm sure, a common refrain throughout, not just in the church, but also, generally speaking. And I remember thinking to myself, and it kind of upset me, because the most intimate relationship aside from our family that we have on this earth is our relationship with God and Jesus Christ. And so, that should never be negotiated in the form that we communicate with him. Right. And so if my relationship with God is more personal in Spanish or Tagalog or French or whatever, then that's what it should be. And Latinos specifically that are Spanish dominant, they're very faithful and have a strong faith, even from their previous religion. If they're, first generation, they have a very, very, you, like I said, you can attest to that from your mission, very strong, unwavering faith in God. And if that's in Spanish, so be it. I think that's beautiful. And so, I think, again, going back to the question, is finding that common ground, and then also probably, if possible, feasible, trying to find activities where there's kind of a cross culture of thing, right? So what we would do often is every fall, and most Spanish wards do this, is we have like a cultural night where we set up booths from every country where we share food, and we have like a folkloric dances on the stage and everything. That tends to be our biggest event of the year. And we often invite members from the stake, or we always invite members from the stake, and we invite them kind of jokingly to set up a USA table. So they'll have cookies and like apple pie or whatever, but it's a great way for them to see how we value family, which is the same as, quote unquote American values, but also to try different foods and see how we're still united by faith, but we have certain differences, but that's okay. But we still have fun. We still smile. And then after all that, we pick everything up, and then we do dance, we do salsa dancing and other stuff like that. And so, I think it may be kind of one of the principle that I said is see them how the Lord sees them. So I think all of us as members, whether we're English speaking or another language speaking unit, see those others in our stake, how the Lord sees them. And I think that really changes the perspective for everyone.
What about the dynamics? Like I've often hear maybe, this is a human thing. Mm-hmm. We have this mentality of like, there's a right way to do things. Right. And then you put that in a structure of a very well organized church with handbooks and even, the unwritten order of things, which I hope is a phrase that goes away. But, there's this feeling of like, even in the handbook, if it doesn't say, there's just sort of a way to do it. And maybe it goes back to your example of, when we teach children in American culture, it's maybe with a little more reverence, right? Yeah. And on the tone of our voice and those types of things, where we sort of project that onto, well, when we're in the chapel, there's a level of reverence we need to have, or whatever it is. And maybe we think, the Spanish speaking ward, they hold parties in the church, which are probably a little much, or,
right.
These are maybe perceptions that are maybe subconscious a lot of times. Or I've heard, so sometimes there's complaints to the stake of like, somebody should really talk to the Spanish bishopric about their parties because they're doing it wrong. Right.
Yeah.
Or even the way you socialize in the foyer maybe be a thing. And so I've heard of some mistakes. Well, we always keep the Spanish word at the last of the day because they're sort of disruptive. Right. And it's a very practical answer, right? Of maybe maintaining reverence, but it can come across of like, well, what are we, like the stepchild in the stake? And not that I'm saying you experienced this, but speaking generally, like, is there anything to say about that? Yeah,
and I definitely experienced that. Not so much in this stake, but in others I have, in other branches that I've attended. But I think it comes down to you have cultural differences, obviously, with American culture and Latin American culture, where we tend to be more, I guess, loud and more social, and especially wherever the situation is, right? But you also kind of have a chasm of differences also too within the church culture, right?
Mm-hmm,
with the way that we worship God is still ultimately at the core the same, but also you have to take into account too that because of our upbringing, first generation, second generation converts, were if most of us are originally from the predominant Catholic faith, we still have some of those things ingrained of how we socialized or how we worshipped, right? And so you have to, if you understand that context, that background for the Latino culture, it makes sense why it's like that. Unless you come here and get back to the church and you become totally Americanized or Utah-nized or whatever, because that's a
disease, I'm afraid.
Right. Yeah. And the church is different too, no matter what. I think one of the biggest culture shocks that I had when I went to Florida on my mission, because the first ward that I went to was an English speaking unit that had a small Spanish group. And I was just floored by the difference in organization and just the culture of that ward as opposed to the ward that I went to in Holiday. So just a vast difference. And so it's not just English and Spanish, but it's also just depends where you're at. It's going to be different in California, Nevada, right? And then remember, the church is a global church, right? If you were to go to a ward in France, it might be completely different than what you would see in Pleasant Grove.
Yeah.
And for some in Pleasant Grove, it might be completely irreverent for what they're seeing in France, right? Or in Germany or in Africa or wherever. And so I think, how to address that. I guess it just comes down to what we've said before is, understand that there are differences. It's not going to be the way that maybe, traditionalists might say, and I guess I use that term loosely, but just maybe what we're thinking of core Utah membership, right? I don't think there is a right or wrong way. I think if it's going back to the basics again with faith, repentance, baptism, gift of the Holy Ghost, enduring to the end, if we're maintaining to that, the rest of the stuff that doesn't matter as much, right? We're still taking the sacrament. We're still following the doctrine as it should. Just other things that are unwritten, I don't think matter as much.
Yeah. And I think it's just that awareness, right? Of sometimes you feel that and you're like, oh, I sort of feel this tension because they're doing it different than I would do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's okay. Here we go. Anyways, back to, or maybe I should go in and grab a taco or something.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I really, I always, I love it when English speaking members or youth from the stake go on Spanish speaking missions, because you can see how that's changed them when they get back. And most of the times they're always like, I want to go to Spanish ward or branch because it's just, oftentimes they say it's so much more fun or more spiritual, or just because of the realness of the people. And I'm not saying that as a critique or they see something different that they didn't see growing up in an English ward. Right. And so many come and sometimes they meet their significant other at a ward, or they get married and they end up coming to a ward. So we had a lot of members who were grew up, they were gringos, so to speak, that went to English ward growing up, went on a Spanish speaking mission, ended up marrying a Latina, or sometimes they married also another American or gringa, and they both attend a Spanish ward just because they really want to help, and more than that, but they want to be in a ward that they feel good about and So we have a lot of diversity in that sense as well.
Yeah. And I love those moments. I was in a stake with a Spanish speaking unit, and just walking into those activities, like I was suddenly transported back to my missionary days. And it touches my heart in ways that, because I just had experiences with these people and their culture, that I'm like, this feels good. I'm glad I have this opportunity to sort of come back here and participate like this. So, right. Awesome. Well, let me ask you this, just like practically, I love asking, like, any apps your bishopric use, or word council, or call lists, or anything that's a great question. Unique.
So are you familiar with WhatsApp?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually
outside of America. It is.
Yeah. So especially Latin America. So I use it for work as well. So I do aside from the work that I do in the US, a lot in Latin America with soccer. And so that's the messaging app of choice, but also in our ward. So we're able to, it's just so much easier than text messaging. We created a ward council group for WhatsApp, a bishopric group, an extended bishopric that included the financial clerk and the ward clerk, young men's just for the youth, young men for the parents, young women, young men. So that way we have different groups, and that way we're able to keep bounce around. Yeah, we can bounce around. We kept the conversation going. A lot of that time, especially during the pandemic, it allowed us to, still focus on the important things without having to meet in person. We would have virtual meetings through Google, but if we needed immediate answers, it's so much easier than text messages, because we're able to, the interface is easier. It's easier to send images. The quality of images is better. We're able to have immediate phone calls, like conference calls there. And so that's really the main one that we use. And that was from an efficiency standpoint, it helped tremendously.
Nice. Love it. All right. Last question I have for you is, as you reflect on your time being a leader, especially a bishop, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
Well, I think just, and I don't mean this in a sacrilegious way, because you're kind of put in a situation as a bishop where you have to preside and essentially represent the Lord, right? And so it helped me understand how to see, going back to my first point, seeing how the Lord sees others, right? And so looking past their defects, and it helped me gain an appreciation for despite our defects, how the Lord truly loves us, and the miracle of the atonement, because we have so many, even the best person on the earth has a plethora, very specific word there, of sins and transgressions that without the atonement, we cannot return to live with Heavenly Father again, right? And so the fact that His grace is sufficient for all of us, despite our efforts, is probably one of the biggest learning lessons I had as a bishop, is just the miracle of the atonement, and that it is through Him that we can achieve cleanliness and purity and eternity with our families.
And that concludes this How I Lead interview. I hope you enjoyed it. And I would ask you, could you take a minute and drop this link in an email, on social media, in a text, wherever it makes the most sense, and share it with somebody who could relate to this experience. And this is how we develop as leaders, just hearing what the other guy's doing, trying some things out, testing, adjusting for your area. And that's where great leadership's discovered, right? So we would love to have you share this with somebody in this calling or a related calling, and that would be great. And also, if you know somebody, any type of leader who would be a fantastic guest on the How I Lead segment, reach out to us. Go to leadingsaints.org/contact. Maybe send this individual an email letting them know that you're going to be suggesting their name for this interview. We'll reach out to them and see if we can line them up. So again, go to leadingsaints.org/contact, and there you can submit all the information and let us know. And maybe they will be on a future How I Lead segment on the Leading Saints podcast. Remember, solve the burden of meetings by visiting leadingsaints.org/14 and getting 14 days access to the Meetings with Saints virtual library.
It came as a result of the position of leadership which was imposed upon us by the God of heaven, who brought forth a restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when the declaration was made concerning the only true and living church upon the face of the earth, we were immediately put in a position of loneliness, the loneliness of leadership, from which we cannot shrink nor run away, and to which we must face up with boldness and courage and ability.